Okay, so welcome to the Oregon Mariculture Network meeting. This is our first meeting, and the goal of this network is really to help build upon the momentum that we started at the Mariculture Future Forum earlier in November. No longer this year, it is now January. And our goal here really is to connect across the mariculture sector and provide a platform for folks to be able to have updates, share knowledge, training opportunities, and really support and enhance sustainable mariculture here in the state of Oregon. And how are we going to do that? Well, part of that is starting with this network and having people that are involved in the network help actually define our priorities. Really meeting regularly and working towards building a mariculture community here in our state, and then actively working and collaborating together. So we will be inviting you guys in breakout rooms for some engaged activities and thinking about how we're going to continue to work together through the next year. My name, for those of you who haven't met me already, is Alex Marquit. I'm the Mariculture Extension Specialist and an Assistant Professor of Practice at Oregon Sea Grant and Oregon State University. And I am co-facilitating this network meeting with Susie O'Neill. Susie, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Susie O'Neill. I'm the Coastal Communities and Fisheries Coordinator at EcoTrust.
So today we are doing this general kind of overview and an introduction and welcoming everyone. We'll have a presentation from Jon Bonkoski giving us a quick overview of the Mariculture Future Forum because I know not everyone was able to attend. And then a presentation from Plough at USDA ARS, who unfortunately USDA wasn't able to attend the Mariculture Future Forum due to the government shutdown. So we thought that would be a great way to start this network going. And then we're going to spend some time actually working together and designing the learning and actual actions that we're going to take as a network together through the next year, and then provide opportunities for folks to give updates before we adjourn for the day. So I'm going to welcome Jon to come and talk a bit about the Mariculture Future Forum. Oh, I hid my notes.
All right.
There we go. Jon Bonkoski is the Vice President of the Coastal Communities and Fisheries at EcoTrust. He works collaboratively with EcoTrust staff from Alaska to California, engaging partners to co-develop projects in fisheries, food systems, and aquaculture and tribal stewardship. Jon has been part of EcoTrust for 20 years and is part of the Oregon Coastal Mariculture Collaborative, as well as a board member for the Oregon Aquaculture Association.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, Susie. Really appreciate you both organizing this meeting and keeping the momentum moving forward. So, yeah, as Alex said, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the Mariculture Future Forum that we hosted in November. Alex, you can advance the slide. We were really excited about this. It was a two-day workshop in early November, and we really were happy with what came out of it. I think it felt like it really sparked some great momentum around mariculture in Oregon and taking the next steps. Some of the feedback, there was a large amount of agreement around how valuable the forum was. People learned some great things around tools and resources. They found the networking opportunities really valuable. A couple of the outcomes from it is that we are preparing a white paper around some of the research and development needs we heard. And then obviously this call is one of the things that is coming out of it as well, like an opportunity to continue that connection and momentum. And we were really excited to see that in Coos Bay, they're forming a mariculture focused work group. So a few things that have come out of that forum that was really, really great to see. Next slide. Some of the aha moments we had during it, which was, I think, a lot of them, but these were a few that we captured as a group. And I guess I'll back up a second, which is that the Oregon Coastal Mariculture Collaborative, who hosted the workshop, is made up of EcoTrust, the Oregon Kelp Alliance, Oregon Sea Grant, the Nature Conservancy, and Oregon Aquaculture Association. And we pulled this together, this opportunity to talk about this as like a really first step of engaging the larger community around mariculture and trying to take those steps forward and think about where we want to go and how to proceed with growing and expanding this industry in Oregon. And what we heard from the folks that were gathered there was was really that they were excited that this was actually a focused conversation on mariculture, on shellfish, on seaweed, on opportunities, on urchins, other things that are happening on the coast in Oregon. A lot of folks mentioned this being the first time that they had had an opportunity like that, and that was really exciting to hear. There was a group consensus around a need for addressing some of the regulatory barriers in Oregon. I think we had a number of conversations around that, and that was definitely what we heard, and how much everybody kind of coalesced around that idea. We heard some exciting possibilities around some mariculture related to seaweed growing and cultivating in Oregon, and how that's possible, more possible, I think, than we had expected. There is a lot of interest in creating and exploring financial tools that are creative and new, and that there was a great presentation from Cheryl Chen that I think really sparked some interest from folks. We were excited to hear from our partners at the Coquel tribe, their interest in mariculture development and potentially being a conduit for that in Oregon. And then, as I said, we identified a number of priorities and needs that were there, and then felt like we really generated some enthusiasm and optimism for the industry in Oregon. Next slide. So some of the near-term activities that are coming out of this is that we are supporting the working group in Coos Bay as they're coming together. Really excited to hear that. I think you'll hear about an update from that in a little bit. There is a white paper that is focused on the research needs that will be coming from OSU and our partners there, Kelsey Emmerd being the lead on that. Based on the conversations we heard from the growers around some of the regulatory issues, the National Sea Grant Law Center is helping us right now with an analysis around what are the pathways for change. Are they regulatory action with agencies, or are they a legislative action that we have to put forward a legislative package for? And so we're getting some an analysis of that now. We were coming together as a group and were able to put forward some support, submitted a proposal to the Allen Family Philanthropy that was led by the Oregon Kelp Alliance to help focus and take the next steps on some of the work they're doing, and really excited about that. The Nature Conservancy is going to be distributing the spatial analysis report that they've completed. I think we'll hear an update about that in a little bit. And then we are connecting now to the Blue Food Forum, which is going to be here in Portland, Oregon, on February 1st and 2nd, and just sort of continuing the conversation around blue food in Oregon, food from the ocean and seafood, and really excited about that. Next slide. So in 2026, some of our continuous outreach is this call. We want to continue the momentum and continue the building of our community as a larger, broader community around mariculture. So we're going to be hosting quarterly calls, this being the first one. Really want to continue that momentum and build on what people's interests are and help us stay focused on really the next steps there. You may have heard that EcoTrust, we're producing a podcast called Tending the Tides. We just put up a recent episode around Olympia oysters there. So we have, I think, 3.5 episodes out now. So please check that out, available on all the platforms for listening. With our partners at the Oregon Aquaculture Association, we have just begun distributing the Oregon Aquaculture Roadmap, which is a broader kind of statewide strategy around how to expand aquaculture in the state and areas of focus, with several recommendations for how to take the next steps there. We're going to continue our work trying to connect with community colleges and thinking about how to take those steps around the workforce development. And then in the fall, we're hoping to have another more focused conversation around aquaculture, maybe that is inclusive of multiple types of aquaculture, but we'll also have a real strong presence around coastal mariculture. Next step. Oh yeah, and I think that's it for now. There's probably more to talk about there, but that will be what we provide. This is a bit of an overview. Excited that we're here, and this is taking those next steps. So thank you very much for your time today and joining us, and I'm going to turn it back over to Alex.
Great, thanks so much. From here, it's actually going to go back to Susie.
Awesome.
Susie.
Thanks, Jon. That was a great overview. The next section of our agenda is going to be a presentation, like Alex said, from Lewis from the USDA Pacific Shellfish Resource Unit or Research Unit. And like Alex said, we were supposed to have Neil Thompson at the Future Forum to present but he wasn't able to join us because of the government shutdown. So really excited and grateful to have Lewis here to present today. And so Lewis Plough is the unit research leader for the USDA ARS Pacific Shellfish Research Unit, which is based at the Hatfield Marine Science Center in Newport, Oregon. His research interests include oyster breeding, shellfish genomics, and understanding the causes of mortality of oysters in the field. And so he's going to share with us about the work that they do at the Pacific Shellfish Research Unit and some of the resources they have. So I will go ahead and share my screen and turn it over to Lewis. Let's see. Okay, how does that look on your end?
That looks good.
Okay, awesome.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction, Susie. All right. And I'll just tell you to advance slides. So thank you for the invitation. And Neil is sorry he couldn't attend this, but I think this will be a good opportunity to give an introduction to the unit overall and to kind of talk about the kind of research we're up to, our resources, our facilities, and some of the people that make our work possible. Okay, so we are based at the Hatfield Marine Science Center, OSU's Hatfield Marine Science Center in Newport, Oregon. And we reside in a number of lab spaces where we do our research across a number of buildings, none of which are owned by us, but we lease space from OSU, EPA, and NOAA. We also have a lease space in Willapa Bay, sort of staging for field work. But we have great facilities, as I show in these pictures on the bottom right. Hopefully you can see those. Great facilities for algal culture. We have plankton bioreactors for growing the food for baby oysters and for adult oysters. We have facilities for full life cycle culture of oysters, as well as for running, not quite yet, and for running intensive and small scale experiments, manipulating environmental conditions. So we have state-of-the-art facilities for research, for breeding, and for doing lots of different kinds of projects with shellfish. And so we've been building out these resources over the last few years. So a lot of the effort and work has been to really build out our infrastructure. And so I'll show some highlights at the end of kind of the new and great things we've been doing at our facility. Next slide, please. So who are we? So I recognize some of the folks in the audience. You might have seen this before, but hope this will be a review for some of you. But who are we? So the ARS, so we are the USDA Agricultural Research Service. We're kind of the research arm of the USDA, and we are a new unit called the Pacific Shellfish Research Unit. We research multiple species of oysters. We're sort of all things shellfish and breeding and environmental research. We are currently comprised of 4 sort of research scientists through the USDA, myself, Brett Dumbault, Neil Thompson, Bernard Akala. We have 2 USDA technicians, 1 USDA support scientist. And then through cooperative agreements with OSU and others, we actually have a full staff of OSU employees. So we have a really, really strong partnership with OSU here. We're really grateful for that partnership and for the collaborative research kind of ideas and work that's been spawned. And so we have a number of full-time staff that work on our breeding program and our various, sorry, not quite yet. And our various research questions. We also have postdocs, and we collaborate widely. So we collaborate across the West Coast. We work with folks at UC Davis, University of Hawaii, and we have a number of, oh, it keeps auto-advancing, that's okay. A number of different collaborations, and we also work with the industry quite strongly. So we have partnerships and material transfer agreements with a number of shellfish growers where they're actually using our production, the seed that we produce. So a lot of great partnerships so it's not just us here at Hatfield, it's kind of the network of collaborators and researchers that drive the shellfish unit. All right, now we can go next slide. Okay, so I want to put some faces up just to show all the great people that we work with. Again, we're a pretty new unit. We've been around since 2022, so we're still growing, although we're reaching a point where finally we're kind of filled out with staff. And so we have some excellent folks that have long-term experience in oyster systems production, aquaculture, ecology, molecular genetics, biology. So we have a lot of really great people on the team. Okay, we can advance. So, all right, so what is our mission? So our mission, broadly defined, is essentially to improve the sustainability of oyster and shellfish culture on the US West Coast. So that's a pretty broad mission, and it encompasses a number of research directions that we are currently undertaking. And we work on multiple species, I should say, although we focus primarily on the Pacific oyster. But I want to highlight some of the recent research areas and projects that we are currently working on. So that's kind of the next few slides. We'll be talking about kind of what drives our research and what are some of the sort of snippets of research ideas that we're working on currently. So we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so just to kind of give some background on what we were working with and sort of where we're coming at our research questions is we're addressing challenges that face Pacific oyster production. That's kind of what one of the driving forces behind our research. And so I highlight three major challenges that we're currently working on, and I'll also then highlight the research that goes along with these challenges. So the first one is summer mortality. And so what we see across the range, across the West Coast, is high and unexplained mortality events during the summer and other times during the year as well, but mostly in the summer, associated with biotic and abiotic stresses. And this could be driven by reproduction, temperature, various pathogens. And because oysters are grown in diverse locations, each bay or location has its own environmental parameters and stressors that contribute to differences in growth and mortality, but in very different ways. So there's no single cause of mortality. But we're trying to address this holistically to understand what we can do to reduce on-farm mortalities and to increase resilience of oysters in the field. We're also working on herpes virus. This is a major challenge to the industry and actually is a worldwide problem. This virus, Australian herpes virus 1, or OSHV1 for short, when it outbreaks, can cause upwards of 70, 80, 90, even 100% mortality of stocks. This is a major problem for the industry. It's been found in Europe, Oceania, also in California waters. So it's present locally, not in all waters, just in a couple of locations, but we're concerned about the potential for it to break out. So there's great concern and great interest in understanding more about this virus, and also if we can create oyster lines and families that are more resistant to this virus. So that's one of the core, kind of one of the reasons why the unit was formed was in part to address this question. So that's a major driver. And then finally, we have long-term sort of ecology work that sort of predates the unit through Brett Dumbolt, one of our ecologists on the team, who's been looking at burrowing shrimp in Washington state estuaries. And so burrowing shrimp in high densities, they can create excess sediment, destabilize the bottom, which suffocates young oysters and actually can just make culture for growers more difficult. And so I'm going to address some of the research that Brett has done over the years, over almost 20 years of research on burrowing shrimp, as it still presents a major issue to the industry in Washington state and in other places. Okay, next slide, please. All right, and so this is just, it's jumped again. So this is kind of a parallel slide here, but just showing these are the research areas, and I kind of organized them based on effectively the kind of drivers of our research ideas and our project plans. So I'll first address some of our efforts to look at alternative causes of summer mortality, looking at harmful algal bloom species effects on oyster feeding, physiology, and immunity. That's a relatively new area of research that has been spun up in our unit. We're also going to talk about, and this is what Neil was invited to talk about, I think primarily, was to talk about Australian herpes virus outbreaks and breeding for resistance. So creating more resistant oysters that we can then provide to the industry on the West Coast. And I'll talk about some of the recent updates on that work. It's definitely progressing. And then finally, I'll go into some of the long-term data on burrowing shrimp and have basically the monitoring of recruits and adults and how control measures for these shrimp have changed over time and are evolving essentially to be more environmentally responsible and to hopefully be as effective as previous methods. So again, I'm keeping this relatively short, so hopefully there'll be lots of time for questions. But I'm going to basically introduce three of these research areas that have been major in our unit. And then finally, I will go over some infrastructure updates, some exciting changes to our facility that I think are really opening up new possibilities for research, collaboration, and our ability to get oysters to the industry. Okay, so with that, let's advance, please. Okay, a lot of text on this slide, but it's worth it. Okay, so one of the first area research I'd like to highlight is measuring the effects of harmful algal blooms on Pacific oyster immunity and physiology. And so here we're examining the effects of an important HAB species present on the West Coast on oyster feeding and immune response. So toxic Alexandrium, so Alexandrium is the species of algae that we're working with. It's present on the West Coast. It produces a potent neurotoxin that is responsible for paralytic shellfish poisoning when consumed by humans. How it affects oysters is less clear, but there is some evidence that other HAB species can have negative effects on oyster immunity and health. And so we're trying to understand this, but it's far less studied in oysters. So to understand the actual effects of HABs on oysters and their possible contributor to these summer mortality events is an open question. And so it's a really interesting potential factor for summer mortality. So to do this work, the first step was to obtain these cultures and to grow them. So this is a lot of work to even get started in this project. So you do obtain and evaluate these algal strains. We obtained a toxic strain, Alexandrium, that was isolated from the West Coast. We also brought in a control strain, which is an Alexandrium species, but it's non-toxic. So we had a nice comparison of feeding and physiology and impacts between two similar sized cells. That was the first step. And so we've spent a lot of time growing these strains and learning their idiosyncrasies. It's not trivial. Darren De Silva, our algalogist, has been really huge in helping to get these cultures going and to maintain them. And so currently we know that we have a toxic strain that's been measured, and so experiments can proceed. There's been a lot of work actually to do sort of extensive testing and optimization of these feeding trials. So to actually make these feeding trials efficient and work. It's not trivial to do feeding trials with algae. It's actually quite challenging to estimate clearance rates and to do sort of the real hard science of estimating effects on oysters. So a lot of work has been put into essentially to maximize replication. Oh, got it. 5 minutes left. And essentially to sort of get our experiment started. And so finally, I want to show just one slide here. At the bottom is a figure showing the effects of consumption and elimination of toxic algae. So for example, we have 3 different species that were fed. The Alexandrium tamarensis is the first one in gray, which has that's the first one. And the second one is Alexandrium, the toxic species. And the third one is a dietary algae that we expect to be fed on easily. And the y-axis is the time to elimination. So you can see that the time to consumption is shorter for the dietary species, and it's higher for these toxic or Alexandrium species. So we think there's definitely some changes or challenges to elimination of the algae when we have these toxic species. So that's just a snapshot of some data from these early feeding trials. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so on to the POGS research program. So POGS stands for Pacific Oyster Genomic Selection Program, and this is essentially the breeding program that is producing oysters for industry. And so the first trait targeted is selection for improved resistance to OSHV1, to herpes virus. And so that's been kind of a core focus of POGS. And just to orient you again to the nature and scale of this problem, there's high mortality rates across all these locations. So it's a major issue for the industry. Next slide, please. Okay, and so I'm a little short on time, so I might go through this pretty quickly, but essentially we've been doing these very targeted and careful challenges of oysters to the virus to understand how resistance varies across families, because it's from those families that we can then select families to breed for more resistant lines. And so we do this in a closed system in Arizona. We use a bath inoculation approach, and then we basically look at the differences among families and use standard quantitative genetic methods to look at trait variances and estimate expected breeding values, which tells us which families to choose, essentially. So which families are better performing. Next slide. Oh, sorry, that was an animation. So here is the kind of snapshot of a lot of data and a lot of results put in one slide. So far, the team has evaluated survival against OSHV1 microvariant, which is the isolate from San Diego specifically, which is this highly virulent form of the virus. And what we see in this figure is sort of preliminary results. Each dot is a family, and each On the x-axis are different populations, and so families were created from a number of different sources, and they were tested in this experimental exposure. And what you can see is there's substantial variation in performance. That y-axis is the estimated breeding value, so higher values equals better survival, and lower values equals lower survival. So you can see every group has some high-performing families, and it's from these families that the plan is to start breeding more resistant lines of oysters to get to the industry. So that's essentially the current status, is that we have this is in progress, and we have identified some elite families at this point. So that's kind of the breeding update. Next slide, please. And with my time left, I'm going to go quickly again here. So just wanted to highlight the really important ecology research that we also have done for over a number of years, predating the unit. And so this is led by Brett Dumbault. So it's sort of one of the long-term sort of areas of work, tracking burrowing shrimp populations in Oregon and Washington. As I mentioned, burrowing shrimp can suffocate oysters. They're a challenge for productive culture. And actually, previously, growers were allowed to use pesticides essentially to control shrimp. That's no longer the case. And so they are a difficult sort of problem to control, especially with non-chemical methods. So Brett's research is focusing on control methods, or collaborating with folks that are doing control methods, and also understanding long-term patterns and trends in population of these burrowing shrimp. Next slide, please. And so here's a lot of data, but just showing recruitment data, showing abundances of adults and recruits over time. We have long-term monitoring sites in a number of places on the Oregon and Washington coast. That's shown here in these various colors, from Willapa Bay and Tillamook Bay and others. So basically, we have long-term data, about 20 years worth of data, tracking these shrimp populations and their sort of spatial and temporal presence. So this is really important work that continues to this day. All right, so next slide, please. I wanted to just finish with some highlights of our recent infrastructure improvements, because we've done a lot of work in the unit to build up our infrastructure. That's been sort of a key focus and a lot of effort of our group. So we've recently installed this broodstock repository raft, which is shown on the left. There's a view of it again on the upper right. And this is an amazing piece of infrastructure that allows us to essentially grow oysters throughout their full life cycle, and produce oysters, adult broodstock oysters for crosses, and for also donating or giving to industry. So that's a huge infrastructure improvement. Next slide, please. That's an animation showing the old raft. So a huge improvement from the old raft for sure. Next slide, please. We've also installed two Titan seawater heaters. Of course, oysters and algae require warmer water than ambient provides at times in the year. So we have added some major upgrades to the ability to supply warm water and to control that water within 1 degree centigrade. So really important improvements that our crew has done. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to highlight just the installation of a new spat rearing system, a nursery system for growing the baby oyster phase. And this has expanded our capacity significantly to grow individual families. This is important for our breeding program and also for doing research as well, where we want to sometimes keep families separate. And we have 3 of these tables, so 60 of these silos is now available. Please advance next slide. And you can see here the sort of the rapid growth we get under the conditions that the POGS crew has set for these systems. So really expanding our capacity to produce oysters for research and for the industry. So that is it for me. I think I'm a little bit over time, but hopefully time for questions. And hopefully that was a helpful snapshot of what we're up to. There's a lot more than that, but that's kind of 3 things I wanted to highlight today.
Awesome. Thank you, Lewis. That was awesome. A great overview, like you said. And yeah, we have a few minutes here for a couple of questions, and I can leave the slides up in case we want to navigate back to any of them. But yeah, please feel free to raise your hand or put questions in the chat if you have them.
It looks like there already are a couple of questions in the chat, and I will go ahead and stop the recording now so people can ask whatever questions they would like.